In this series, Losing the Relationship to Suicide, I wanted to talk about the relationships that don't readily come to mind. We always talk about the familiar ones, like loss of a child or loss of a sibling. But how about someone we see for a great amount of time during the week? I'm talking about our fellow coworkers. In this episode, I spoke with Dr. Jonathan Singer. Dr. Singer has a vast resume and prestigious appointments and accolades in the fields of suicide prevention and social work. But with that being said, at the end of the day, he's just another coworker who had to navigate losing his coworker and friend. I hope you find this episode helpful. Here we go. Hi, everybody. This is Tracy Oeser with Journey Through Grief, and we're here today for another episode of Losing the Relationship to Suicide. We have started this series to just highlight different relationships that we end up losing when someone dies by suicide. And so today I'm really excited and really humbled. We have Dr. Jonathan Singer here. And let me tell you a little bit about him, and then we will get into this conversation. So Dr. Singer is an internationally recognized expert in youth suicide and social work technology. He's a professor of social work at Loyola University in Chicago. He's a past president of the American Association of Suicidology, although we did not serve on the board at the same time. He's co-authored 2 editions of the best-selling text, Suicide in Schools, A Practitioner's Guide to Multi-Level Prevention, Assessment, Intervention, and Postvention. And he hosts the award-winning Social Work Podcast, for which he was named an NASW Social Work Pioneer in 2023. He has chaired national committees and served on various advisory boards related to suicide prevention 988. He is the author of over 90 publications and has given over 1,000 continuing educational workshops. In 2024, he was inducted as a fellow of the Society for Social Work and Research. I will be putting all Dr. Singer's links and other contact information into the show notes, so you should be able to find those below. So, hello, Jonathan. Thank you for coming on here and talking about such a tough subject.
Yeah, well, Tracy, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. So part of the reason why I invited Jonathan on here was one of the relationships I wanted to cover was when we lose a colleague. And Jonathan experienced that a few years ago. So I'm very excited that he wanted to take the time and just discuss how this relationship and the loss of this relationship impacted him. So tell me, please, who did you lose to suicide and when was that?
Yeah, so I lost my colleague in the School of Social Work and friend, Michael Kelly, in September of 2021.
Okay. And how did you find out about?
So I was at, I have twin boys, and I was at one of their soccer practices. And I saw that the dean of the School of Social Work, Gautam Menon, my dean, was calling me on my cell phone. Honestly, I didn't even know that he had my cell or that I had him in my contacts under mobile, but I did. And so I picked up the phone. Again, it was a surprising thing to see anyway. But I was like, hey, Gautam. And he said, Michael Kelly killed himself this morning. And I was shocked. I was speechless. And, again, imagine the scene. Here I am at a busy elementary school playground. And there's all this joy and life around me. And and Gautam tells me that Mike is dead, and I, I and part of my brain went into like professional mode,
Mhm.
professional like suicidologist and like work
Right.
mode,
Hmm.
like, oh, my boss is calling me. But
Mm.
the other part of my brain was absolutely um, uh, sort of speechless that my friend was gone.
Yeah. I think that was one of the things I kind of wanted to talk about today was, because both you and I work in this field. And so to deal with such a traumatic topic, I find for myself, I have to compartmentalize, right? I'm either on, I'm over here and I'm on and I'm talking to people. And then, there's that other side of me that falls into grief and takes all that grief home and has to work through that and what have you. And I had a friend who had lost her son to suicide, and she's a psychologist. And I was amazed at how many people had come up to her just like within the first week or so of losing her child to say, well, you're a psychologist. How did you not know what was happening? And here she is, she's in a puddle basically on the floor every day trying to function. And here are these questions. So what you do for a living, how didn't you know this? And so I think, one of the things I wanted to highlight on this episode was, you know, the people that work in the behavioral health field, we're all human, right? And we all experience these things, to the same level as everybody else. That it can just be gut wrenching and stop you in your tracks. And, sometimes we don't want to be hit with those professional questions.
And I
What
mean, I
did
think
you
those
see?
professional questions are absolutely a worthwhile thing for somebody to grapple with themselves,
Hmm.
right? Grapple with, not sort of beat themselves up about,
Hmm.
but to grapple with. 4 days before Mike died, I had resigned as
Mm.
president of the American Association of Suicidology. And one of the reasons why I resigned was because was spending far too much time focusing on an organization and not enough time focusing on the business of saving lives.
Right.
And there was a um, there was a lot of um, grief that I was dealing with and some relief um, around stepping down. Uh, but when Mike died, I I did have to grapple with this. I don't want to say paradox, but this sort of these dual roles that I had been playing. Like on one hand, I was the president of the largest membership-based suicide prevention organization in the world, and on the other hand, my sort of best professional colleague uh, had just killed himself. The very thing that I was sort of supposed to be solely focused on addressing. Um, Now, I will say that um, I I wasn't Mike's oldest or best friend, right? I really got to know him in 2015 when I moved to Loyola from Temple University. Um, his oldest and best friends in the field, um, Julia Price and Kate Filippo, um, we Julia and I knew each other, but the three of us really supported each other afterwards, and I was able to kind of process some of this. So I did not go down the I did not go down the rabbit hole too far of, I should have um
Or all the guilt or all the
all of those
Where could
things.
you have placed the knowledge you already had to change the situation or
Yeah.
create a different situation? And,
Yeah.
you know,
Because the three of us were able to triangulate, right? So we were able to say, oh, wait, so Mike was talking to you about that. Well, that same day he talked to me about this. And we were able to sort of support each other in the fact that, and we were all social workers, and that we had all, even though he had been struggling with a bunch of things, um, we had all done what we would want people to do, and Mike was doing what we would want people to do. Right? He had a therapist, he had a psychiatrist, he was reaching out to friends, he was talking with his partner. His partner was supportive. Like all of these things, he was doing, and we were doing. We were responding to his texts. We were having phone calls. We were able to put some pieces together afterwards, as everybody does after a loss, right?
Yeah.
But
I think it's good that you had that circle of other colleagues, that could evaluate that, because we know that there's so many people out there who have a loss and then they're just isolated, or they don't have the backgrounds of, what do we look for, what, happened. So aside from those colleagues, did you have interaction with his family, with that level of friendship?
um, so I knew his family. They lived in a different part of Chicago than I do, and so we didn't, we didn't get together very often. His kids were a little older than my kids, also, so it's not like our kids were the same age and we're wanting to hang out. But certainly, every time Mike and Lucy and I saw each other, it was lovely. But I my relationship with Mike's family was very intense immediately following his death, because one of the things that Gautam said to me when he called me up, he said, I'm on my way to campus to pick up Ben. And Ben was Mike's son, who had started college at Loyola, where his dad was a professor.
Mm-hmm.
And Ben was in class and hadn't yet found out.
Okay.
And he said, I'm going to pick him up. He said, I'm taking a cab to campus and I'm going to pick up Ben and I'm going to take him home. And I thought to myself, you're going to take a cab from Loyola to Oak Park at 5:30 in the afternoon? Like,
Rush hour
that's
traffic.
terrible. Yeah, I mean, it's literally going to take you like hours. So I said, do you want me to get my car and meet you there? He said, yes. So I left the soccer game. I didn't even tell anybody. I was so out of my mind. I just left.
Sure.
And then I called my wife, and she was amazing. And she said, oh my God, wait, I will bring the car to you. And then I was like, oh no, wait, Luca, he's in a soccer game. Like, she's like, don't worry about it. So I got the car. I drove down to Loyola. And as I was pulling up to the building where Ben was, I saw Gautam's cab pull up. And I got out and I saw Ben. I saw Ben on the phone, and I knew that he was going to be talking to his mom, and he was finding out the information.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just kind of drew a blank. I'm like, what do I say? Like, what do you say literally 1 second after somebody learns that their father's died, whether it's by suicide or whatever,
Sure.
sort of
Anything. Yeah.
anything, right? What do you say? Especially because Ben and I, even though we knew each other, we weren't close. So I go up to him and I look at him and I'm like, I'm so sorry. And he's like, thank you. And like, I hug, and then Gautam comes up. I don't know if he knows Gautam at all. I assume he does, but I don't know. And then Gautam says the
This is
same
just
thing.
Dad's boss. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he's looking at us, and we tell him, you're coming with us. We're going to take you home. And it did. It took like an hour and a half
Mm-hmm.
for us to travel, I don't know, 10 miles,
Yeah.
right? Because of the traffic. And Galthaman and I are alternately like crying in the front seat. And probably no surprise, I'd never cried with my dean before. And Ben was sitting in the back seat, and um, I won't share his story because it's his story to share, but I will say that for me, it was so intimate and intense to see this 18-year-old processing this information,
Mm-hmm.
um, and seeing him go through what he went through, and making the phone calls that he made, and um, um, it actually moved me out of um, kind of professional mode into personal mode,
Mm-hmm.
because I saw, right? Um, I just saw that.
You
I
saw it
saw it. I felt the
firsthand.
sadness, and it made it so real. And then we dropped him off, and I saw Mike's wife, and anyway, I'll never forget watching Mike Ben give his mom a hug and kiss her on the top of her head and say it's going to be okay, and it was just heartbreaking.
Oh, I can't even imagine. I mean,
Yeah,
everybody has a story of how they found out and how everything processed in the you know, first few hours to the first few days. And uh, I've yet to find somebody with the same story because it's all, heartbreaking. Um,
yeah.
so going forward a little bit, so
Mhm.
let me back up. So I've talked to other loss survivors who then, they have this loss, they have to go back to work. They find for themselves that that person that passed away is just kind of, eliminated, for lack of a better word. Um, Everybody moves on. Everybody thinks that, we should move on. Did you experience anything like that as far as Mike not being at campus anymore and other colleagues just going on like nothing happened?
Um, no, almost the opposite.
Yeah.
And perhaps it was because I work in a school of social work,
Sure.
right? Uh, and I should say Mike was beloved. Like, I'm sure there were some of my colleagues that, you know, were kind of ambivalent about him, right? But nobody disliked him. And
Right.
there were lots of folks who loved him. Um, and so uh, there were multiple efforts to honor Mike. Um, uh, there were, but sort of, from the dean's level, uh, to the staff level, we would we processed as a faculty
Hmm.
several times. The dean had a standing open Zoom meeting, because again, this is in 2021, right? So this is, I should say, part of it is that I had seen Mike the week of, um, it was like March 8th, 2020.
Hmm.
And then the next time I saw him was the week before he died because of the pandemic. So I'd seen him online, but I hadn't seen him in person. And so there was a sense of like processing online is what we did. And the dean had he had essentially office hours. I can't remember if it was every other day or every day, but it was for weeks. He just sort of left a Zoom room open where he was going to be, and others could jump in and talk. And it was amazing, right? It was very honoring. Um, People rallied around funding a scholarship. Although scholarships are very expensive to fund, so it's a still ongoing process. The school social work certificate program that he ran the Summer Institute for 16 years. It was renamed in his honor, the Mike Kelly or Michael Stokely Kelly Summer Institute. And it actually, um, uh, so that was September of 21, September of 20, or August of 22, when we got back together. I was asked, should we, um, how should we process Mike not being here?
Mm-hmm.
And I actually said, Mike's wife was Jewish, his kids are Jewish, and even though Mike was, Irish Catholic, um, he he raised his kids Jewish. He was in a Jewish household, and there's an idea that after a year in Judaism, right at the yard site, the 1 year anniversary, the mourning is sort of the formal mourning is over, right? And then every Friday, right, there's the mourner's Kaddish, and then there's the yard site every year. So there's lots of opportunity to grieve in public and private. And I said, I think Mike would know that we have the business of sort of running the school and training the next generation of social workers to get back to. Not that we will ever forget him, but that at a certain point, blocking off 30 minutes of a 2-hour meeting to process Mike isn't helpful. And for some of us, it's distracting and almost, and this was not their intention. So I do not want anybody to think that I'm disparaging, but it almost forces sort of a performativity, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
About grieving, which is that after a year, and again, everybody liked Mike. Some of us were closer than others, but there were also new faculty and new staff that didn't know Mike. And so you're in a work setting. And so you show up to your faculty meeting and they say, now we're going to spend the next however so minutes remembering our colleague who died. And you're like, I didn't know that guy.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
because it's a work setting, it changes things, right? Again, does not stop you from gathering outside or physically or virtually. So to answer your question, far from people sort of forgetting and moving on or saying you should kind of move on quick, I ended up being one of the people who said, I think we need to move on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a difference between like that experience and the people that don't have the support and they don't have the ability to, bond with their coworkers over this grief process that are then told to move on.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I'm all for talking it through. I think it speeds up the grieving process. Or, obviously we don't get over them. I think it kind of brings us to where we can, accept what happened and not feel a level of guilt because we have, like you said, we've processed through things. We've asked all the questions. I mean, even in my 4 phases of suicide loss that I've put together, when we get to the acceptance phase, I've had so many loss survivors mad at me saying, I will never accept this happened. In retrospect, I probably should have named it something else, but here we are. But they're like, I will never accept it. And I had to do a presentation to the long-term loss survivors in July for their AFSP conference. And I I said, okay, then the 4th phase is acceptance. And I just got these stares like they wanted to just take me out and beat me. And I said, I've defined a new way to, you know, talk about acceptance. I said, acceptance is not, we're now moving on and never talking about that person or thinking about it. I said, think of acceptance as measurement. It's simply a measurement from, between the time that person passed away and now. Where are you on that, ruler, so to speak, of, your loss and your emotional state and all of that. So, but I can support what you're saying in that, okay, we've done all of this process and all of this work. Now, we can look at back to, our schedule and our life is normal here and, still bring him up when necessary. Like, I
Hmm.
think that scholarship is, a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Um, it's, as with all loss, it's very intricate and it's very, all the different layers, right? Um, so after you've met with, or you've taken Ben home and you've met with his wife and all of that, and obviously you're having these, events at school that are helping the process. But when you go home and you're all by yourself, um, what worked for you as far as grief processing, redoing hobbies? Were you, I know faith is important to you. Was faith a big, um, guide to how you process your own grief?
So there were, I actually found it comforting to, be at Shabbat services and, have the mourners Kaddish and be able to participate that in a group way. Uh, there was a service for him at his synagogue that was very, very moving. Um, and for me, again, part of the processing and the grief work was being part of this group chat with Julia and Kate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and I, I mean, I feel grateful that I know enough about grief and loss, both through my own personal experience uh, of sort of on time deaths in my family, right? Very close to my grandfather, and he died. And, you know, I mean, at this point, all my all my grandparents have died, but also we had a stillbirth. The second child after my daughter was born, before my twin boys were born, and navigating that grief, I I knew enough about um, how um, I oftentimes would experience grief in as irritability or anger,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that having opportunities uh, to kind of be prompted to feel sadness. And again, I mean, and I'm not talking like the first few weeks. I mean, it was just sort of like waves would hit. So it's not like that, but like the work after that, right? You're getting back to work, you're grading papers, you're seeing students, you're doing the thing. Um, and so watching movies that I knew would kind of prompt the tears.
Mm-hmm.
I already knew, as from the work that I'd done as a frontline social worker, working with suicidal kids, like that was helpful
Mm-hmm.
in letting it out. And so that was part of the grief work that I allowed myself to do. It's not that um I didn't plan it out, I accepted it. And I was also very upfront with my kids. Like, I think it was like that day or the next day. Um and my boys were like maybe 8. My daughter was, no, they were a little older. Anyway, they were elementary school and middle school. But I said, that man that we went out to dinner with, his boys and his wife, and, well, he died blah, blah, blah. And, I'm very sad about it and I'll be sad for a long time. And, so I kind of set up the family, and my wife was super supportive. Um, so all of those things, um, I was grateful that I knew to do. And so I felt like I was able to kind of almost set it up for the unknown. And so when the unexpected, when you had these sudden temporary upsurges of grief, right, these stug responses, like I was ready for it. And
Well, I have to say, I'm
uh,
so excited, if, for lack of a better word, but I'm so excited that you're saying that, because I used to think that I was weird, because I would do the same thing. I knew I had to process this emotion and I had to get it out. And if that meant I had to, watch some movie that Chelsea used to like and, lose it right in the middle, that helped me. And so then I would be, crying, upset. And then I would have people rally around me going, "Oh my goodness, are you okay? Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Oh, fine. Just got to do this." And they go, "You're doing this to yourself?" I'm like,
yeah,
"Yes, because the
yeah,
more I get out,
yep,
the less amount of time I'm going to be doing this all the time. So
yes,
let me do it."
yes,
So
that's
you've
right.
just confirmed that for me, and thank you.
you're
Because now
you're
when
welcome.
I tell everybody else to do it too, and they're looking at me like I'm crazy, I can be like, "No, it's been confirmed. We're good. Please do this."
Yeah,
Just, out of curiosity, if you're able to share, how's Ben doing now? We're 3 years later.
yeah. Ben is doing well. He took a semester off and kind of did his work, and um, he's been able to kind of do the things that he has wanted to do.
Uh-huh.
Um, and his twin brothers, uh, they both struggled in their own ways in high school after their dad's death, and um, they're doing well.
Good. Good.
So yeah, thank you.
Well, I just have a couple more questions, really quick. So, you know, again, this episode is how we deal with loss of a colleague. You're president of like the biggest organization in the nation here for suicide. Um, we have like two different types of colleague losses, right? We have the colleague that, we work at the grocery store and they're just a colleague. They have to go back to work and deal with that loss of them not being there. But then we also have the type of loss where we work in the field and we're losing somebody else that works in the field. And I know that there's a great organization, and I'm going to link that in the show notes, for therapists, social workers, behavioral health people who lose someone to suicide, be it their client, be it a colleague, but they're able to go and work that through with court, and usually it's anonymously, because again, we have that stigma that we're always on, and that we
Yeah.
know it all, therefore we don't grieve like everybody else, which is, again, not true. So being having the status that you did, yeah, I'm just trying to differentiate of how it's different. And you have someone that works in the same field you do.
Well, so what I'll say is that uh, I mean, I think what I experienced that a lot of loss survivors experience was, I did question. I was like, wait, what did I miss? Right?
Yeah.
Like, um, and there was an added layer, which is, Mike taught people about suicide prevention. And so, like, what was it that he knew that I would be looking for that he would make sure I didn't know? So there was that added layer of like, was there something intentional that he wasn't saying yes to, or he wasn't sharing with me? And I don't know if there was. Again, I didn't, I processed a lot of that with Julia and Kate, and that was incredibly helpful. But um, I think the other thing that made this different than, say, losing somebody who's not in the field is that um, if you were a school social worker in Illinois in the last 16 years, like
Mm.
16 years before he died, you would know him. It's likely that you were trained by him, that you went through a certification with him, that you read his books, that you were assigned his chapters, that you used the phenomenal school social work network website that he did. Right. So he touched so many people's lives who
Mhm.
themselves were mental health professionals. Right. Um, and And so, in that sense, it was different because I found myself having many conversations with folks who were in the field, who are now grieving, and who are
Mhm.
now, perhaps the first time, suicide loss survivors
Yeah.
of somebody that they knew, they loved, they respected. Um, and so there was this like ripple. You get Julie Searle's research about 135 people who are seriously affected by a suicide death, and certainly Mike's death was easily 135, but it was probably closer to 5 or 6 thousand, given who he was and given his reach, um, and um, and so yeah, so in that sense, it was very different than knowing somebody who I had passing relationships with, or had I not been in the mental health field and a
Right.
close colleague had died. I mean, I'm not saying that people outside of mental health don't have
Right. Right.
impact on others, but these were all mental health professionals, many of whom didn't know about his prior struggles with, he was in active recovery from alcohol overuse, and he struggled with a history of depression, which he had been public about, but it wasn't something he spent a lot of time talking about. But he blogged about it, and there were a lot of people who were like, I had no idea,
Mhm.
right? Which
Well, I think
again
many
is,
of us get into this field because something happened somewhere along the line in our past that drove us to, try to make things better.
yeah, 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 yeah. And so, yeah.
All right. Well, one more question. Well, the last question. So, what's one thing you would say to him if you had the opportunity?
Mm. Um, I'd probably just give him a big hug.
And
You know,
sometimes that's
he,
adequate, right? So that says a lot all in itself when we do
yeah.
that. So,
He used to say, you know, there's my guy, and it was so endearing, you
yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Just in the few times that I've heard you talk about him, he seems like he was a outstanding guy, and I'm sorry for losing him, and I want to thank you for coming on here and being vulnerable enough to share Mike's story, and just let us know that again, a colleague relationship has its own complexities of loss and what that looks like. And again, especially if you already work in the behavioral health field in some capacity, you know.
yeah.
Um, so again, I'm going to put your show note or your show. I'm going to put in our show notes. I always get choked up at the end of these interviews. I'm going to put your links and how everybody can find you and your podcast and all the other 50 million things that you're doing. I'm going to put in there so they can find you. And again, thank you for taking the time because it's an important topic, as you know.
Yeah.
And for our viewers, if you're struggling with thoughts of suicide yourself, I recommend calling 988, which is our national suicide hotline. There are people there that can talk with you It's anonymous. And even if you know someone else who is struggling, you can call 988 to just get some ideas, tips, support, through helping someone else that you love. Please like and subscribe to our channel. That's how we get the word out that our channel is out here to support survivors of suicide loss. And I just, appreciate all of the great comments and feedback we've been getting about how we're filling a need in our communities. Go to Journey Through Grief's website and find other resources as you need. So thank you again, Jonathan, and I'm sure we will talk soon.
Thank you so much, Tracy.